So, let me just make sure. I think we're recording. Um, Thank you for joining our monthly data forum. I always gotta start by talking about who's co-hosting this event, and it's Detroit Data, which is the open data catalog for Detroit and the metro region. Um, the data catalog and community portal hosts over 1,400 data sets from 7 different open data portals, as well as about 50 organizations that are sharing their own data. And Detroit Data hosts this monthly data forum, where our goal is to dig into new data or interesting data. And we invite really excellent panelists to come give some context to that data and help us better understand. Um, and the other co-host is the Go Data Commission. And that's a diverse group of stakeholders from data experts, community leaders, and representatives from various sectors in Detroit, all dedicated to ensuring that the city's open data efforts serve the needs of residents and promote informed decision making. Um, and we are super excited to have these 3 amazing folks join us to talk about the arts and creative ecosystem of Detroit. We have Kevin from DesignCore Detroit, Steve from SAID, and Nafeesah with Detroit Excellence in Youth Arts. They have all done some really incredible ecosystem mapping recently of creative and arts in kind of different sectors. So I'm really excited to hear from them. And so the 3 panelists will have 5 to 7 minutes to share, and then we'll go to discussion and Q&A. Kevin, I'll hand it off to you.
Alex, thank you, and happy Friday to everybody that's joining us here today. Again, Kevin Gilboe from DesignCore Detroit. My main focus has been on working with the mobility startup ecosystem and also the tech sector in Detroit. Um, and so I think because Design Core Detroit does have a huge network, but not everybody may know who we are. It is good to start with our website here. And I specifically would like to highlight under that City of Design tab on the top there, go to the mission and vision. So we are an economic development group focused on the creative economy within Detroit specifically, but also Southeast Michigan. And there's a couple of pillars in that mission. So number one, we do a lot of one-on-one bespoke interactive coaching, working directly with founders and small businesses. I mean, they know us as friends and allies and networkers, supporters throughout their journey. But number two, we also have public platforms, and the number one is Detroit Month of Design. That's coming up in just 2 weeks. And so Detroit Month of Design has last year's lineup, we had 90 events across the city landscape, highlighting all kinds of different dimensions of the creative community. And so in this format, it's part a celebration of creativity, but it's also an opportunity for people to build their businesses. So on this page, Alex, if you go scroll up a little bit, one of the things that I'd like to highlight on the, yeah, there you go, is there's a Detroit action plan that was created back in 2018 through a lot of work, and this is before my time joining DesignCore, really to get a baseline understanding of what the creative economy looked like. You know, what when we talk about the Detroit landscape as a city of design, what does that really mean? Who are the participants? What are the different industries? How does it all come together? And so it's been some time since we did that work, and now we're gearing up to take a look at this again. And we've done a little bit of outreach in the last year to get perspectives on different aspects of the creative economy, and you're going to see this work continue to grow. Last thing I want to mention in the quick intro here is that we have a really unique role in that we represent the city of Detroit within the United Nations Creative Cities Network. So many people may have heard of UNESCO, like World Heritage Sites. There's also a whole network that highlights creative cities with unique perspectives on creativity. It could be a focus on design, it could be a focus on literature, film, craft, other fields. And so Detroit is actually the only UNESCO designated creative city in the US. And we have the high honor of managing that designation on behalf of the city, on behalf of the creative economy. What it does is it puts us in a position where we're also connecting abroad. So when we talk about data and insights and perspectives, we have a lot going on from a hyperlocal point of view that we are increasingly digging into. But moreover, we're also thinking about how Detroit connects worldwide with other creative cities and other opportunities for business growth. So, last thing I'd like to share to wrap it up, if Alex, you could go to the other website, the Detroit Month of Design, just to show you an example under the events calendar, which just launched. We just wrapped this up and it is fully ready to go. If you scroll down to the bottom of there, you'll see an interactive map, um, which is a kind of a new thing for us. So in the past, we would list the events and every event would have its own information about it. But we have started to really get our hands around the data sets and start to normalize this so that we can think about the geography of this event and start doing visualization. So one of the data sets that I shared on Detroit Data is actually the uh, the locations from 2019 to 2024. So there's almost like 400 listings in there. And we're thinking about, okay, what does this mean? How can we analyze this? How can we think about the reach, the geography? Are there areas that we want to put more emphasis on in the future? So it's an example of how we're using data to improve the platform for everybody. I guess that's all for now. I mean, Alex, back over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. I'm so excited about this map. It's great to see. Um, yeah, and Steve is up next.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so I'm talking from the perspective of an organization called ESSAID. We're a Detroit art, writing, curatorial, educational, and research organization. You can go online, essay.org, going to see a whole lot of stuff. I'm going to talk today about the research that we're doing. Um, I'm going to talk about what we do. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we do it, because I have a very specific reason for doing the research. And then the implications, I think, are beyond the scope of a 5, 6, 7 minute talk, but I'm happy to come back at any time and talk with anybody about the research in general. So we do some case study work, but we also have kind of two core projects. One is to map the Metro Detroit art ecosystem as it is, and the second is to benchmark it against metropolitan twin cities. When we say Metro Detroit, it's the Tri-County area, Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne counties. And when you talk about the Detroit art ecosystem, it's obviously got many, many layers. And we kind of look at four of them. Firstly, from the top, firstly, the ecosystem is a social network. It's a network of individuals and institutions, and we map that in Gephi. And that data comes from the not-for-profit tax returns, and it comes from the websites of the organizations. We map how economic capital circulates in the art ecosystem. That is mostly through the tax returns of not-for-profits, but it's also from the overviews of how money comes into the art ecosystem. And specifically, we're looking at ongoing publicly reported investment. And specifically, we're looking at the not-for-profit sector. And then we look at a spatial aspect of it, which is where is the money going throughout the tri-counties? And it's largely done in a spreadsheet, but we've kind of dabbled in QGIS, working a little bit with DEYA's data and including it with the data from the city of Detroit and the data that we provide. And then the experiential layer is how do people experience the art ecosystem? So audience numbers, traced through social media and so on. We benchmark against the Twin Cities because if you look at the National Art Vibrancy Index, which looks at metropolitan areas, the Metro Twin Cities, I think, ranks 5th behind New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and I think DC. Metro Detroit doesn't rank in the top 20. So it's sort of like the closest comparable highest ranked city. So why do we do it? We have to take a look at sort of a little bit of my background. I have a foot in two camps. One is in the engineering and tech area, and the other is in the art area. And I have various roles, of course, historically, in both of those in the art area as an artist, as a gallerist, as a curator, as a writer, and also an activist founding different organizations like Essay. And then in the engineering and tech field, I have various roles there, project manager, solution architect, and so on. And that kind of blue squiggle is sort of my kind of attempt to look at what are the parallels particularly in terms of process between these two things. Because, I mean, in a way, a curator is also a project manager, right? So you can't forget that you're a project manager when you're a curator. And similarly, curator, if you know anything about the tech industry, is sort of a solution architect as well. So really started to look at two questions. How should arts and culture resources, specifically funding, be allocated? And then how do you turn resources into programming, which is what I call the curatorial, is taking resources, space, funding, and turning it into some kind of programming. And so what I sort of did was, okay, what are the sort of comparable processes in the engineering and tech field that relate to these questions? So if you look at the lower one, how do you turn resources into programming, the curatorial? Well, that's an example of what in general would be called a structured design methodology. And so what would a structured design approach kind of applied to curating look like? And from that, we developed the questions of curating workshop. We've delivered half a dozen times. You can go online and see the feedback. Pretty good. So the top one, of course, is the big one. How should we allocate resources in what is $350 million a year industry? Well, that's done in general in sort of the engineering tech field through value delivery methodology. But the first stage in a value delivery methodology is always what's called an alignment, which is you gather everything you already know about the existing system and how it compares to some best-in-class system. And so if you're going to take an organization like the Earth Foundation, who are going to spend $100 million in their spend down estimated on art and culture, if you want to get them kind of from their non-rigorous, informal, subjective, we can barely call it a process that they're currently using, to a more rigorous, you have to give them a basis align them in a basis in the objective data that's already out there. So the as-is model and the benchmark, they can be used for many, many different things, and we try and kind of create these, this is just a draft, but these trifold sort of summaries of the data But what I want to do is I want to get decision makers onto a more rigorous process. And the starting point of that more rigorous process is what's commonly called the alignment phase, based on the as is and some form of benchmark. No. So the implication is going to take more than a few minutes, but I can say this. The Detroit art ecosystem is a battle for resources in which the large institutions, greater than $1 million, particularly those in the downtown area, have overwhelming advantages. And that reflects about $20 is invested in the Woodward Corridor for every dollar that's invested in the neighborhood. And I think it's about $40 that are invested in the large institutions for every dollar that's invested in the grassroots. And to change this, we're going to need a re-emphasis on the curatorial, how you actually kind of how you turn money and resources into programming, and ultimately some kind of behavioral change from your funders, to tether the narratives that they historically have worked from to objective data. And the good thing is it won't take much change for the impact to be immense. It's $1/3 billion plus a year industry. If you can make 5 to 10% more impact in how resources are allocated, and if you can make 5 to 10% improvement in how those resources are turned into programming that people experience, that would be the equivalent of a new fund for art and culture dedicated entirely for art and culture in Metro Detroit of about $1.25 billion, which would dwarf anything, even including the DEYA. Please don't hesitate to contact me. Please don't hesitate to go to the website. A lot of this research is up on Essayed, and happy to go through this in more detail with anybody else at any time. Thanks, Alex.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much.
Wow.
All right, and our last presenter is Nafeesah. And she's already posted the research and data link in the chat.
Everybody see that? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. You're good.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Nafeesah Symonette. I'm Executive Director of DEYA, Detroit Excellence in Youth Arts. And I want to walk us through, first of all, yes, I did share the link to our data that is collected on our website through multiple research and data collection reports. But I want to start with who and what DEYA is. DEYA is a collective impact initiative that is working to increase access to the arts, access and opportunity to the arts for young people specifically, so for the youth. So, you know, in order for us to get to the place of, you know, having artists that are a part of these ecosystems that would, you know, be the artists for DesignCore or the artists that are working through for say, we have to nurture them as young people first in order for them to matriculate into these other fields. So our focus is K through 12 youth. I apologize too for the background noise. I'm in a cafe right now, just in case. And when we started this work back in 2020, early 22, we set out first to understand what the needs and barriers were to not only organizations, but to young people being able to access opportunities across the city. And so we set out with a list of about 20 different arts organizations, and it grew to over 50. So we have well over 75 youth serving arts organizations in the city of Detroit. And we had an opportunity to talk to many of them. And some of the things, and this is the first report that you see here, Powering Youth Arts Through Collective Impact. And also I want to, as an asterisk, when we talk about collective impact, we're talking about the connectivity to cross-sector collaboration. So in this work, we are looking to get understanding, resources, investment, thought from sectors that are not related to the arts and not related to education. So we're talking about healthcare, government, workforce development, creative pipelines, the legacy of the cultural heritage and legacy of Detroit. So just briefly, I wanted to provide a couple of data points from each of these different studies. So from this first one, again, we were examining the needs and barriers. And so here you see on your screen is what respondents identified as some of the greatest barriers to not only their growth and capacity, but to young people being able to access the opportunities that they are providing. So you can see, obviously, transportation. This is no secret topic in the city of Detroit. Transportation is our Achilles heel, I think, in that young people have this incredible barrier to being able to access, unlike young people in New York, Chicago, and Washington D.C., where there is mass transit that can get them to and from their locations, from school to home and back, vice versa. You can see, obviously, fundraising support, funding for staff, operations, and then school partnerships. These were the top five barriers that were identified. And so we start to address those things a little bit later, but let me keep going. So in our small group convenings with youth arts providers in the city of Detroit, here's the things that they said that they prioritize: an information hub, teaching artist ecosystems, community partners, youth arts advocacy, and cross-sector mentorship. So as a collective impact initiative, we see ourselves sitting in the place as an intermediary. And what that means is that we don't do DEYA, I'm speaking about DEYA, does not do programming for young people. We saw a significant gap in the fact that there was not any baseline information or data collected around youth arts in the city. So we didn't know what existed and who was doing it and where it was located. Organizations, executive directors, and program directors, there was no platform for them to be able to communicate with one another or to be able to easily collaborate with a multitude of organizations all at once. So we find ourselves, because we don't do programming for young people, and our goal is the sustainability of the entire youth arts ecosystem, we look for opportunities to not only identify what is the specific gap, and then we look for funding resources in order to shore up that gap. So I'll give you an example for the Information Hub. So when this became our number one priority that was identified by the youth arts providers, we set out to look for funding to create a communication hub. And therein lies our website, DEYAYouthArts.com. On our website, there is a link to a page called the Navigator, where profiles of all of these different organizations exist, where before there was nothing like this. There was no place for any parent, youth, organization to go to discover all that was available for youth arts in the city of Detroit. So just to give you an understanding of the void that DEYA is filling. So these are some of the recommendations. And the first one being to develop a network, which is what we did. We developed a network that is not the DEYA network. It is the Detroit Youth Arts Providers Network. So this is a collaborative network where the members of the network are the governing body. In addition to that first, the Powering Youth Arts Through Collective Impact, we had sort of an attachment that went along with that, which was the Youth Arts Mapping Project. And if you go to our data page, the link that I shared, you'll see an interactive map there that looks just like this as the cover. I just want to highlight a few things from this particular report. So we were looking to pinpoint all of the out-of-school time youth arts organizations, where they're located, who's accessing them. So we spoke to 53 different art programs, youth arts programs, and we surveyed 113 Detroit schools. So this includes DPSCD schools in addition to charter schools. And we collected over 2,000 individual zip codes from young people that were participating. And here's some of the things that we discovered. Just about half, you see on the left-hand side, half of the young people in this survey were traveling from outside of the city of Detroit in order to access youth arts opportunities. Now, this told us two things. One, that Detroit has incredible and significant programming within the city of Detroit. The other thing it told us is that the majority of the students that are accessing this are not in the city of Detroit. They're coming from the surrounding suburbs. So we see that as a challenge, that young people in the city of Detroit are not the ones overwhelmingly who are accessing these opportunities. Also in this study, we didn't set out to uncover this. It showed up in the data that there were 5 zip codes in the city of Detroit that showed the least arts opportunities across the entire city. So you'll see those 5 zip codes highlighted here. They have the least opportunities, but has the largest collective number of young people that reside in that space. So you can see on the right-hand side where we give you a narrative that this demonstrates the disparity, that there are more youth in the Oak Park zip code participating in youth arts opportunities or offerings than all 5 of these zip codes combined. So take that in for a second. That's significant that we have that many number of young people that are participating outside of the city of Detroit. They combine within these 5 zip codes. And then our last report that we just released just about 2 to 3 weeks ago. Our latest one is in partnership again with our data partner, Data Driven Detroit. And here's where we were mapping, trying to understand what arts education was available in school. So the first one was about out of school time. This one was about what was available in school. And so you'll see who and how many we surveyed. The 79 schools that offer K-8 and 26 that offer 9 to 12. And this is just DPSCD, you'll note at the top of the slide. We compared that to the data that we collected from charter schools, and you can see that DPSCD outperforms charter schools by way of offerings. So they are providing more visual arts and more instrumental music and vocal music and that kind of thing. However, we also know that only about 47 to 48% of the young people in the city of Detroit go to DPSCD schools, and our work surrounds access and opportunity to all Detroit students. So there's a large swath of students who are not receiving quality arts education within their school day. I'll stop there. Thank you. So this is, you'll see in the link. Let me stop sharing my screen. You'll see in the data link that I shared that all of these reports are listed and available, and always available to have conversations around this topic. I'd like to offer one other thing, that as a part of this work, DEYA received a National Endowment for the Arts grant, where it is our goal to develop an arts education action plan. And in order to develop that arts education action plan, we have convened what we call the Detroit Partnership for Arts Education. And you'll see that that's the title of our last report. And that partnership is inclusive of cross-sector collaborators. So we have folks from healthcare, we have folks from government, from philanthropy. And I'd like to note that of our national engagement, DEYA's national engagement, we have been the only organization to successfully have healthcare at the table around the conversation of youth arts. Because our partners in healthcare, and those are Henry Ford Health, the Children's Hospital, and Wayne State University Pediatrics, they have acknowledged and agreed that that an increase in the arts and arts education for young people would improve mental health outcomes, would improve social emotional learning outcomes, would improve academic outcomes. And this is a large conversation across the country that is not being had. And so I'd like to just highlight them. So our next phase is to start the Detroit Partnership for Arts Education in January, and to start to develop the action plan. Thank you so much.
Amazing. I that is such incredible work. And true for both Nafeesah and Steve and Kevin. It's great. I guess there are action steps that people can look towards. With DEYA putting together the action plan, I know Kevin noted DesignCore is putting together a new uh, uh, City of Design action plan. Is it action plan? Um, and Steve is willing to talk to anybody about the further details of his analysis. So thank you all so much. These were really great presentations. So now we'll move into discussion and any questions that folks have. So you can feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute. I guess one I'll kick us off with a question, and one thing that I've been wondering about, over the last decade or so, do we see the kind of arts and creative ecosystem contracting, expanding, um, or what are some of the things we see going on there?
If I may, we see the arts ecosystem expanding. And one of the reasons why, for us, from our perspective, is because we are trying to intentionally create pipelines to the creative industries for youth. We have all of us on in this webinar, we are all adults. We are well into our careers and we're doing things. Who's the next generation that will be in this webinar and having these discussions and doing this research? And in order for us to be able to answer that question, we have to create space for young people to be developed within the arts. I have to remind people all the time, the arts and creativity, critical thinking, creative thinking, it's not a light switch. You don't just turn 21 and you flip a switch and you automatically become creative. It has to be developed and nurtured. And so it absolutely will be expanded.
Could not agree more with that. Just to add to it, I think there is just such a rising tide that we're seeing in terms of the overall vibrance of the city, and more people playing, coming in and building things here in Detroit. And also corporate engagement is also really cool to see the level. I mean, we at DesignCore, just with Month of Design alone, we have 60,000 participants in that festival throughout the month. And you think about that and then just go through the rest of the year. There's a lot of people that are getting involved in this community.
I can perhaps put a few numbers on that. So the data that we take largely comes from tax returns. So the impact of COVID is still working its way through the historical record that we have. But if you look at the period come into COVID, at least the not-for-profit economy was growing at about 6% a year over, I think, a 5-year period. But I think the overall, that's our art and culture, but that can hide a lot of things. And I'm over, I think the large institutions of greater than $1 million are still receiving way over 90% of the funding. So that overall figure really reflects how those large institutions are growing. If you look at the funding that's going to the grassroots, I think that's still very, 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 very low, kind of just a few percent. And there are some structural problems that are on the horizon, which is that historically the cost of space in Detroit for artists has been very, very low. And artists need space, both to live, but also for their studios and so on. So to give artists low or no cost space is the closest thing you can do to give them a universal basic income without giving them a universal basic income. And as the cost of space starts to increase, I think we've got some challenges. for the arts grassroots. And one thing we see when we compared Detroit to the Twin Cities, and Nafeesah talked about pipelines, is we're very bad in Detroit at providing funding for a pipeline for new nonprofits to reach that $1 million a year. That intermediate funding. Typically, we've got a lot of startups in the not-for-profit space. We've got the same amount of big institutions. But if you look at the Twin Cities, because they fund the whole art ecosystem rather than just the big institutions, there's a pipeline of not-for-profits that grow. Hence, kind of art ecosystem is growing, and in simple terms, they get about double the bang for the buck for every dollar that they invest because it's spread more intelligently across the different areas of the art ecosystem. So that's a long answer, Alex, to a short question, but it's growing. But that number hides, I think, some structural issues that we need to, as an art ecosystem, address.
Right. Yeah. Bree, go ahead.
Hey team, thank you so much for those incredible presentations. So much information in there. I'm wondering, and I couldn't put this in a chat because I'm actively trying to formulate this question, and forgive me if I missed it, if you all addressed this in your presentations, but I'm wondering if there's any data on, like, we're hearing how much more money is going to these larger institutions than grassroots, but is there data on what the impact of folks funding is doing? Like how many art education programs are being produced, how many shows and exhibits, how many people coming to these shows? Like, is there, I have a hunch that there is a lot more work and access being done in the grassroots space than in the space that these large institutions are working. And so I'm wondering if there is data to support that hunch. Like, it feels like, you know, we can assume these dollars are going to these institutions because they have been, but is there like data to back up that and the impact of these newer grassroots programs and long-term programs that don't have these $1 million budgets?
I can speak to that because it's something that I think about all the time. So collecting data on attendance is the hardest thing for two reasons. The big institutions are incredibly secretive about their attendance figures. And so the DEYA gets $30 million a year millage. When they started getting the money, they started providing less information. And I think the reason for that is pretty clear. It's the number of unique visitors. They don't want to talk about that. At the grassroots, the problem is different. Because the grassroots is so fragmented, nobody is clicking the number of visitors. So it's hard to get information from the grassroots because it's very fragmented. And I too believe that if you add up all of the interaction in the grassroots, it's greater than for the large institutions. There is one place where you can do a direct comparison, and that is in the online trace. So, and it's not exactly, it's not an exact kind of comparison, but just for the hell of it, we took the 15 biggest institutions who get 80+% of all of the funding, and we looked at their number of Instagram followers. And then we took 15 artists and artist-led organizations, not at random, but those that we knew would have a large following. So if you add up the Instagram followers of the 15 largest institutions, if you add up the Instagram followings of 15 well-known artists and small arts organizations, guess who has the biggest online trace? It's the grassroots. So it's very, very difficult to get the information from the large institutions. I have requested from the DIA on multiple occasions their annual attendance figures. I've requested their information on the Van Gogh show, which they claim is this great success. The Van Gogh show 20 years ago was significantly shorter in period. It had far fewer Van Goghs, and it had way north of 300,000 visitors. Probably the latest Van Gogh, which was significantly longer in time period, had significantly more money invested into it, probably had about 200,000 visitors. So the audience for the blockbuster canonical European artist exhibition, you could argue, has lost half its audience in a generation. And yet it is still the bread and butter of the large institutions. So this is the sort of transparency that we would love to get. But I think your hunch is a good one. If you look at the entirety of the grassroots, public art, the Heidelberg Project, Dabbles, I think when you add it all up, it is far more significant than the funders and the funding reflects.
Yeah.
So just
Kevin,
as
you
a
wanna?
quick
Yeah.
build on that, Bree, to your question, we are really in a journey to get a lot more intense in terms of quantifying that impact. And we have been doing that. I put in the chat there from the website. We have a impact report, for example, for Month of Design last year. But I think, just us participating in a forum like this and talking with everybody in this ecosystem, it's a sign we're looking to build a lot more into this space where we're quantifying the events that we build. They do have a sizable amount of impact just by virtue of the number of participants. So again, 60,000 for Month of Design, about 80,000 total for us that we work with throughout the year. All of that adds up. So we need to do more in adding throughout that process.
Thank you. I do have a bit of a follow-up if no one else has a question.
I was going to add just a tiny bit of from the youth perspective regarding your question. It is the same thing that the grassroots organizations are fight more for funding and have a greater impact within the neighborhoods and the community. There is a disconnect from the larger institutions to the community, and we see that across the board. So here's one of our solutions. DEYA is currently researching a sustainable public and private combined source of income to support youth arts in the city of Detroit. And we have looked at models across the country where an entertainment tax is taxed on tickets for sports events and concerts and whatnot. And it makes sense to us that if Taylor Swift and Beyonce is selling out an arena here, that a portion of that would then go to support youth arts. Who is that next person? Who's the next team of 2,000 people that are employed by the Taylor Swift and Beyonce team in order to make that thing happen? And so I think for me personally, there's quite a few different models. But Denver, if you all check out Denver, Denver has a model where for every $10 that's spent in this, it's a 7-county partnership. And for every $10 that's spent, 1 penny, just 1 penny, goes to support the arts and culture sector. They have amassed an $80 million budget because of that. And it all supports the youth arts. I'm gonna look for the link real quick and put it in the chat. But that's our next frontier that we're looking to get a source in this, the DIA has this millage that is supporting, it's coming from citizens in Detroit, in this Tri-County area. But, we think that money, that funding would be better used if it were distributed equitably across that grassroots landscape.
Thank you so much. That was going to be part of my next question. As a person who used to work in development in Detroit's Cultural Center, knowing the grants that they get for youth educational programs and the amount of programs actually produced by these larger institutions compared to, like, I don't know, people in education with allied media projects that actually works in public schools doing these things. I'm curious about, speaking of like development and marketing, just maybe some more practical strategy and curation too, Steve, thinking of some more practical strategy for applying these data points. As an independent artist, curator, organizer, there's always the ask for impact on grant applications from funders. It feels a little, it feels obnoxious to fill out, especially for a program that you're applying for funding for. And so I'm thinking of more practical ways to address impact that you would like to happen and that has happened, that is useful for people collecting data and for people applying for funds in order to produce these programs. I know that's a big question. But
I can speak to that, and I just wanted to take a step back about the funding model. No, definitely will answer your question, B, but the DIA millage, which dwarfs any other form of funding in metropolitan Detroit, it's 3 times the amount of the entire state funding for art and culture on an annual basis, comes to an end in 2033. And while that seems a long way away, if that millage were distributed more equitably, if there were a follow-up millage, which other places have, you don't need to go too far. Even Genesee County has such a thing. The Twin Cities has the legacy sales tax, which is more similar to the entertainment tax. But I think there is a question as to whether the DIA millage can morph into a more equitable ecosystem-wide funding. Those questions probably need to start happening now in order, because we know that the Charles Wright and the Historical Museum are also going after millages, but they're single institutions. It doesn't fund the entire ecosystem. But Bree, in terms of impact, I feel there's a tipping point. I feel that funders can ignore objective data that tethers the narratives to reality up to a certain point. But when more people start using those data points and tether their narratives to the data points, there comes a point at which you have to listen to the new narratives. And so what's the old saying go? We create the road by walking it or something. A lot of funders don't particularly want to have to look at objective data, particularly if it's positioned outside of the not-for-profit echo chamber. If it's universal, if it's stuff that anybody can refer to and use, that's a little bit threatening. But I think it shouldn't be, but it is. But I think there comes a point where more and more people are taking a more evidence-based approach, that those narratives have to be given more weight than the ones that are untethered from objective data and often are untethered from reality. to be honest.
Yeah, that was a great question. Any other questions from folks? If not, I'll just take the last few minutes to thank our presenters, panelists again. Really incredible work. Thank you so much for joining and sharing. Our next Detroit Data Forum is going to be on traffic data and crashes. So we'll have folks with Michigan Traffic Crash Facts and SEMCOG and Detroit's Office of Mobility Innovation. We will post this recording to our YouTube channel, and we'll also put out a data guide where we kind of summarize what happened in the data forum and link to some of the data sets and reports that have been referenced here too.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having
Alex.
us, Alex.
Yes, thanks
everybody.
everyone. Have a great
Yes.
weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.